Luton is a part of the Chilterns. It's known as a gap town, so it grew up in one of the valleys, and some of those are fed with streams and rivers and others are dry valleys. And the chalk was all laid down in the Cretaceous period. That was around 65 million years ago. It's a very permeable rock, and it was a very, very thick layer that was laid down at the bottom of the sea. Later, during the period of mountain building that led to the formation of the Alps, the outer ripples of that affected northern France and southern England. It's a bit like a blanket being kind of rucked up so that you've got folds and so on in it. And the area to the north of the Chilterns, the chalk was all eroded away, so that exposes older rocks. To the south of the Chilterns, the chalk is still there, but under London, it's buried under a very, very thick layer of clay. What you're left with is the Chilterns Ridge running roughly from the northeast to the southwest. And within that, there are various valleys that have been carved mainly by glacial action in the various ice ages that we've had. The River Lee lies in one of those glacial valleys. So that's why the valley that Luton's grown up in is quite a sizable valley, but the modern stream is actually quite small, because one time it was fed by melting glacial water, and that obviously created a much bigger valley than it is now. The chalk streams, they are generally derived from clear, clean rocks without much sediment in them, tend to be very sort of fresh, limey water and have a flora and fauna of their own. So they're important internationally because chalk is a very rare rock in global terms. The chalk is a very permeable sponge-like rock. It's full of little tiny cavities. The rain that falls on the Chilterns soaks into the ground. It permeates down to a level until it reaches something that it can't pass through. So that means that you have a water table, and that fluctuates a lot with the weather conditions and the climate at the time. And it also fluctuates according to how much of it we take out of the ground. We do have streams that are temporary in nature. So in some cases, the stream is there nearly all the time, but very occasionally dries up. In other of the valleys, you have the opposite effect. So they're mainly dry, but every now and again, the water table rises and you get a flood. Obviously, we're very used to the River Lee being present most of the time, and it seems to be quite distressing when it sort of appears to disappear under the ground. But a lot of the species are adapted to sort of weathering that. We do need to keep an eye on these things because with global warming we might expect them to dry up more often than they do, and we need to reduce the amount that we extract from the ground in order perhaps to compensate for that. Up until about 10,000 years ago, the whole of the Luton area was essentially covered in ice, because that was the last of the ice ages. There had been people in the Luton area long before that, and a lot of the archaeology exposed the ancient peoples of a couple of 100,000 years ago in the areas where they excavated the clays to make bricks. Prehistoric peoples that moved in and created sort of settlements that have more or less sort of lasted up until the present day came about as a result of the populations moving into the area after the ice had all melted. Later Neolithic period, which is much more settled, people started farming and so on, and we then have pretty much continuous settlement through the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, and then through into the Roman period up to the modern day. For that last sort of few thousand years, it's been evidence of a population using that area for most of that time. And the main reason would have been the water source. Not only literally as a source of drinking water, but it would have been used latterly for cooking purposes. Because of the spiritual nature, I think, of some of the people that lived in the area, it would have been regarded as a ceremonial site as well. It's sort of a magical thing that the water just sort of happens to flow out of the ground, and I think that's an important consideration, and is perhaps why we have Wallard's Bank surrounding it. There may have been a defensive function, but it might also have been a ceremonial site. And the fact that you had this area where there was a freshwater spring that provided all the needs of people in that early period was very important to them. Also, the river was more navigable than the land would have been, even in Roman times, that boats and things were coming up and down the River Lee, which seems a bit unlikely now. So there was a transport hub as well developing around the river system. Obviously the irrigation possibilities of the water supplies once people settled and they needed to grow their crops. And also water power became increasingly important. Even in the Domesday Book there were 7 water mills recorded in the Luton area. And of course the water was used in the brewing industry, so it really helped the industrialisation of Luton. And if you're looking at connections with the hat industry, you're also looking at the water being necessary for the bleaching and the dyeing and the other processes that went on that enabled the hat industry to flourish locally. At different times it's always been very important, and the emphasis has sort of shifted. And today, of course, it's a recreational facility as well. You know, the ecosystem itself helps us, you know, in an urban environment to connect with nature and so on. We have walkways, we have parks. So I think there's been a kaleidoscopic sort of change in the way in which the river is sort of perceived and how it has fed the development of Luton, but very significant in the town's overall history.